Hi everyone, it's Tamara here again with another card making tutorial. This time I'm using the My Favorite Things stamp set called Festive Old Friends. I'm going to be doing some Copic colouring of one of the images and then Emboss Resist Technique for the background. And this is the Festive Old Friends stamp set. It comes with some great images and some really fantastic sentiments, and I'll be using this gentleman today. I'll also be using the Big Birthday Wishes die and also the Happy Birthday Cling Rubber background stamp for the Heat Embossed Resist, a stitched rectangle die, and some white heat embossing powder. Now first things first, I'll grab out my Misty and also a piece of smooth white cardstock cut just a little bigger than what our stitched rectangle die will be. Now because the Happy Birthday background stamp is rubber backed, we're just going to remove the black piece of rubber from our Misty cardstock. I do have some sticky tape on the back of my Misty panel to hold that cardstock in place. I'm just going to grab our background stamp and make sure it's up the right way and just attach that to the front of our Misty door and use my anti-static powder tool to put a lot of powder on this. I want to make sure that no heat embossing powder goes where we don't want it. I've grabbed my Versa watermark ink and we're going to give that panel a full stamp up. I've grabbed a cloth just to make sure I get a nice kind of coverage with that ink and just give it also a press. Now I can see a few spots that are missing the ink, so I'm going to go over the whole panel again with my ink and now give it a really good press, especially in those spots that are missing the words. Now I can still see a few a bit light, so I'm going to just give that another press. I didn't add any extra ink, but just giving it another firm press down made sure I got ink wherever I need it. I've grabbed out my Stampendous white heat embossing powder and a folded piece of printer paper to catch the excess. Put a sprinkle over, tapped it off and did a second. Now I've used up all that. I'm just going to pour that straight back into the container and do the other end doing the same thing. Just do one sprinkle over, tap it off and give it a second one to make sure we get good coverage of our heat embossing powder. Now I've preheated my heat tool and I've gone to the back first to get rid of any stray particles that might be on the top, and because my mat is glass I can just actually heat emboss straight onto my glass mat because it won't cause any damage to it. I am using some reversible tweezers just to hold the end, and I'm sorry that some of this was off camera, but I'm making sure that's all nice and melted. And once that's done, I'll set that aside to dry. Now that that's dry, I'm just going to grab my cloth and just wipe off the excess anti-static powder tool. And using my Dome Sponge Ranger applicators, I'm going to do some ink blending using Twisted Citron, Peacock Feathers, and Villainous Potion in my Distress Oxide inks. So just turning my panel to the side, and I've grabbed a piece of printer paper that I've just kind of torn up to hold it so I don't get any fingerprints on my beautiful ink blended panel once I get to that end. So I've gone in initially with the first color, the Twisted Citron at the bottom, just making sure I've got a good layer of that, and then we're going to work that between the peacock feathers until we get a really nice smooth blend. So I'm just working in circular motions, and now we're going in at the top with the Villainous Potion, and we're going to go into that peacock feathers and work between the two to get a nice blend. You can see a beautiful kind of bluey color come in between those two colors. So I'm just going back and forth, and you can just see how well that white heat embossing pops. But to make sure we got rid of any excess ink that might be sitting on top of our heat embossing, I just wipe that over with a cloth. Now I've grabbed out my Misty again and some Copic Express It cardstock, so I'll be doing some Copic colouring of our image today. So I've just popped that into my Misty and grabbed out our gentleman that will be colouring up. So I'm just going to line him up on my panel, get him attached to the front of my Misty door, make sure that that's right in the corner in case we've got a double stamp, and I'm just wiping over my stamp to prep him because I've never used this one before. Then using my Memento Tuxedo black ink, which is great for Copic colouring, I'm going to stamp him up. Now I did have that little magnet a bit too low, but because it's a Misty, I can go in and stamp him in exactly the same place and he looks perfect. Now I'm just going in with my lightest E30 to get a nice coverage to work out where I want all my shadows to be. and I nearly forgot his little ear there, so we've gone in there. Now I'm going to go in with my darkest color, which will be E37 today. So we see there'll be a little bit of shadow thrown by his hair. Obviously down the left hand side I'm going to have my light source top right hand side. His jowls would actually throw a little bit of shadow, as well as his nose and also under the glasses, his neck, and also where his shirt comes over his hand, and obviously the base of his hand underneath that present. So I'm going in with my next color, my E35, to blend out that darkest color, the E37. Go in with our next color, the E33, slowly working into our highlight space and working out underneath those little glasses, his neck and hands. And we'll come back in with that lightest color again, the E30, to work into that smooth, to that highlight space. So we've got a smooth blend. Now it kind of faded out a little bit, so we lost a bit of the shadow. So I'm going back in with my E37 to reinforce all our colors. So again, putting it all in the shadows, obviously under his glasses, his ears, neck and hands again. Making sure I've got all of that before going in with the E35 to blend that out. And just working little flicking motions, just going into that highlight space. Getting his jowl done. And then we'll come in again with our E33 to blend that out. Just slowly working into our highlight. Coming up around where his kind of nose will go up into his eye socket, and then come back in with that final color again, the E30. And just kind of making sure you're working kind of like little circular motions so we get a nice smooth blend between all our colors. And don't forget his little hands. Now because his hair is quite small, I'm going to go straight in with our darkest color, the E49, to put in our shadows. Blend that out with the E47. Again with the E44, leaving that little bit of highlight up the top on both sides with our E42 to do our final blend out as our highlight color. Now for his shirt, I'm going to do kind of a green color. So I'm going in with my lightest color first again, just to work out where I want the shadow. So we'll have a little bit thrown by that little sweater vest, and also down the back end of his arm. We'll go in with our darkest color now, our G17. I'm also going to do the present the same color so that we keep it all kind of coordinated, and it will match in really nicely with our ink blended background panel. Now we'll go in with our G05, so most of that shirt will be in shadow, but his little collar will be highlighted because it's kind of popped up a little bit higher than what that shirt is underneath. So we'll finish that off with the YG03. And just work that into our highlight space, so we've got a nice highlight with our YG03. And do the same with our present. Then we're kind of going to do like a little aqua colored sweater vest. So I'm going again in with my lightest color, the G00. We'll go in with our darkest now, the BG78. So obviously darkest at the very back where he's in shadow, and obviously his head will be throwing some shadow. Blend that out with the BG49, working into our highlight space and little flicking motions. Come in now with our BG23, slowly working that forward to our highlight, which will be that G00 again. So obviously this is a G, but it does have kind of like a little bluey like tinge to it, so it works really well with these BGs. So we're coming back in with the BG78 to reinforce our shadows. So just obviously have a look at the images that you're coloring, and just see sometimes you will need to go back in and reinforce some things. Now to make sure we've got a good smooth blend, there's a bit of space between the BG49 and 23, so I'm just doing a bit of tip to tip, and you can see how well that blends out. And then we'll go in with the G00 again to finish that off. Now I'm just going to do some black pants. So with our lightest N marker, N4, I'm going to work out where my shadows will be. So we see down the very back of his pants where most of the shadow will be, and then just a little bit of shadow between his legs as well. So I've gone in with the darkest marker now, the N8, to put that in. We'll blend that out now with the N6. So obviously he will get a little bit thrown by his little sweater vest. And now we'll go in with that first color again, the N4, as our highlight color. Now again, it kind of faded out a little bit, so I'm going to reinforce that again and bring in that N8 to throw our deeper shadows in, and then N6 to blend that out, and just kind of working out into that highlight space where we'll finish off again with the N4. So that's the pants all colored up, and now we'll finish off with his shoes, and then all our coloring will be done. So E39 will be my darkest. Again, there's not much space here, so I'm just going to go in with the darkest first, blend that out with the E37, and our highlight color, the E35, where the shine will be. And now I'm just going to add a little bit of glossy accents to his glasses. I just think this adds a really good touch, and once that dries, it'll be nice and shiny. Now our ink blended panel is dry. I've grabbed out our rectangle stitched die to get that cut out. That's why I always like to go just a little bit bigger, so that way you can center it and make sure you're going to cut it in the perfect spot. Use a little bit of washi tape to hold that in place, and we'll run that through the die cutting machine. So as you can see, now we've got a beautiful stitching detail around the outside of our rectangle. Now sometimes with certain dies it can have a little bit of little bits of Furbies, I call them, around the edge. So I just go in with a nail file and just get rid of those. Now we'll grab out the dies that go with the set so we can cut out our present holding gentleman. So we'll pull him out. And what I like to do when I'm cutting out these type of images, especially when you've spent so much time coloring them up, is use a little bit of washi tape or purple tape to hold your dies in place. So you can line this up really well, and then stick that down with your washi tape, and then when you run it through your die cutting machine, it won't move. I remember when I first started out, I never used to do this, and a lot of the times I'd either cut off portions that shouldn't have been cut off, or have a very funny shaped kind of white frame around the edge. But since I've used my washi tape to hold them in place, you always get the perfect cut around your images. So we'll pull off that die, and now we've got the perfectly cut out image. Now I've grabbed out another of the stitch rectangle dies that come with this set. It's not the one down, but the second one down from the largest one I use for my background panel. And I'm going to grab some black cardstock and cut that out. This is going to form the frame for my big birthday wishes panel. So as you can see, this fits perfectly inside. So I'm making sure I'm lining it up so it's perfectly even all the way around. Again, I'm going to grab out my washi tape, so when I put this through my die cutting machine, it cuts it out in exactly the spot that I want it. Now I'm going to pull out all the letters that come with that and just set them aside, because I will be able to use them on another project. But I'm making sure I'm keeping all the middle portions that come for the letters like B's, R's, D's and A's. So now I'm just kind of pulling out the rest of those like letters that kind of stick in the middle, setting them aside for my next project. But now I'm just going to show you how you can line these little inner portions up for your words, your letters. So you've got your B, your D and your A, and then you've got your other B and R that are going to fit in the middle. So for this, I always like to use the precision glue tool for something quite intricate like this. So because we're going to be going around these letters and also around the edge, and there's not a lot of space, this precision tool, glue tool, works really well to get a small amount of glue all the way around those letters. So I'm just putting a small amount, just a little, it's like only quite a small amount that goes on. And we'll go between all our final letters down the bottom, making sure we've got glue all the way around so it sticks well, especially when you're gluing onto heat embossing. So now that that's all glued down, I'm going to center that in the middle of my ink blended panel, making sure it's square, and we'll set that aside to dry. Now that I've let that dry for a little bit, I'm going to now put in all the internal parts. So I've actually grabbed out the large bee so I can use it as a guide for where I need to put the inner portions for this. So using that as a guide works perfectly, and you'll always get the inner edge, inner spots of your letters perfectly placed. So be very careful when you're lifting this out to hold those inner portions in place so they don't move once you've gone to all that effort of putting that letter in. So I've just grabbed out this little pickup tool to hold these in place because they are a little bit fiddly to put in. So I'm just picking it up, putting a little bit of glue on, and then just using that to pop down in the center of that bee. Now with the R, I didn't bother popping the R in because it's pretty easy to kind of line this up to where it needs to be centered on the R, but use your judgment and whether you feel comfortable just eyeballing it like I just did. So I'll just leave that B for now. Again, I felt comfortable doing it with the D without putting that in because it's very easy to center. So I've lined that up, just using the end of that tool to kind of make sure that's in the correct spot. And because this little inner portion of the A is quite small, I actually put the glue on the card base itself and then put the center on top of the glue and just made sure that that's centered correctly. Now I had a little bit of trouble getting this B out, so I'm just using this little pin that comes with my precision tool, and that was easy enough to pick that out. Now I'm just going to work out where we want to put our little present holding gentleman. Initially I thought about putting him, because he kind of looks like an eye where the eye is, but I thought he kind of, I wanted that big birthday wishes to really shine through as well as him. So I thought he looked quite cute standing just above where that bee is on the birthday. Now I've already cut and scored a black card base, and I'm going to attach our ink blended panel on the top. You could prop this up with foam tape, but I'm just going to glue it directly on the front, making sure I'm putting it on the correct side of my card base. And now I'll set that underneath a book to dry and just hold that in place while I pop some foam tape on the back of our little present holding gentleman. So pop some on his legs, body and head, and then we'll also pop a little bit on the present. Just cut that to size, and then we'll pull off all the release paper. And now our back panel is all dry. We're going to just place him there. Again, just thought I'd test that out where the eye is, but no, I'm really liking him standing off to the left-hand side. Then I thought it looked a little bit lopsided, so I decided to put a little extra sentiment strip with a little sub-sentiment on the right-hand side to kind of balance everything out. Now, because the background's heat embossed with white, I thought I'd do some black on white heat embossing for my sub-sentiment. So I'm just using one saying not older, just better. So I've just prepped it with my anti-static powder tool and used my Versa watermark ink again to just give that a double stamp. We'll grab our piece of folded A4 printer paper again and our white heat embossing powder. Get that double tapped off, and I've preheated the heat tool, and we'll go in and get that all nice and melted. Now I let that dry again and just wipe off the excess powder with my cloth. And now I didn't have a perfectly sized sentiment strip, so I always like to go a little bit bigger so I can cut this down to size. So I put it down one end so it's cut in the perfect spot, line that up with so it's got the same amount of cardstock at the end of the other end. And now we have the perfectly sized sentiment strip for our sub-sentiment. Now, because our gentleman was propped up with foam tape, I want to make sure our little sentiment strip matches. So I've just grabbed out some black foam squares to match in with our black cardstock, pop them on the back and taken off the release paper. And as I said, I'm just going to balance it out to the right hand side. So I'm just lining it up with the edge of the cardstock and just under that big, making sure it's straight and giving that a good press down. And this is a finished card for this tutorial. I just want you to know you don't have to make any mail cards, either black, brown or blue. Use some color like I have in this card with the greens and the purples, and match in your Copic coloring to match in with your ink blended background. And just make sure you give someone a reason to smile with a nice bright card. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. If you have, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.